Thank you very much, Terry. My first duty, of course, is to introduce our panelists. So if our panelists would care to join us, please. Thank you very much.
All of us. Here we go. Too late now.
Are we hot already, you think?
Hooray!
Good afternoon, Stephen.
Yes.
Hi, folks. How are we doing?
Good to see you too.
Stephen, how are you?
Thank you. Jim?
Hello, Stephen.
Okay. So, quick introduction, please. Who are you?
Who am I?
Yes.
So I'm Jamie Smith. I'm with National Instruments, and I'm the Director of Business and Technology with a focus on autonomous driving and the industrial Internet of Things. And good afternoon to everyone.
Hi, folks. Calvin Smith with Wipro Digital, Director and Head of IoT Partner Engineering. Pleased to be here today. By the way, hopefully we can keep this fairly entertaining because I know it's Spanish, after big Spanish meals. We don't want to make this a siesta session, so we're going to make it fun, lively, interactive. Good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Jim Morrish. I am with Huawei Technologies. I am the Chief IoT Solution Consultant for Europe. So I basically look across all of IoT, including areas such as smart cities and industrial IoT, etc. Looking forward to the panel.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So I have a set of questions here, because it's always good to be prepared. Not that I do that very often. But I'm also going to ask you to ask some questions. We have some microphones set in the center of the aisle over here on your left, my right, and the other way, whichever way that is, over that side. So if you have a question, please just wander up to the microphone. I can't see you, of course, but never mind. And then I shall, at random intervals, ask for some questions from you. But I'd like to begin by asking Calvin, please, about the difference between testbed and joint R&D, collaboration, co-innovation, that kind of thing. What's different about a testbed?
It's a really good question. Obviously there's things like internal R&D, skunkworks, things that you do internally and quietly that you don't necessarily want other people to see. I think one of the things we've been hearing consistently throughout this entire conference and in the past years too is that IoT is definitely an ecosystem play. Testbeds enable you to really, don't get me wrong, there's nothing better than working directly with a customer and solving their problem, and then moving on and working with another customer and solving their problem. But with the necessity of everything being open, and the fact that we consistently in IoT see and hear that cybersecurity and of course standards, interoperability, general fragmentation in the market, by creating a test bed and pulling an end user or a customer or deployment site in, you really open it up to the world. Now, obviously, as you join a test bed, we'll get a lot more in detail about some of the test beds we're all engaged in. As you join one, you need to have a reason to join, an actual inherent value to add. But just having a platform that says, we're here, this is open, and by the way, for end users, there's a lot of rigor to get involved, but end users don't have to actually be named on the test bed either. So when you get into sometimes sensitive subject matter areas, you can have, as long as there's a deployment site, there's a viable place where you're doing co-innovation or some shape or form of experimentation, it can be something that's fairly pragmatic, customer-oriented, and made real, but at the same time open to the world. So it's different. It helps you to really elevate what you're doing and kind of get it outside of the bubble that's either your internal R&D, or even sometimes it can be fairly closed off when you're working directly with a customer.
Thank you, Colin. So now we know what one is. I'd like to ask Jim what the key benefit of having one would be.
Well, the key benefit, as was mentioned, there's the technical level of benefit. It's proving that the stuff works. It's taking diverse players from different parts of the ecosystem who won't have worked together, or may have worked together, but in different ways, in far less open ways. And as we know, that the IoT ushers in far more engagement and value networks in a way where previously we had value chains. So there's a much closer way of working together that has to be supported, and that needs to be demonstrated at a technical level. But I'd like to then move on from that and say that is a critical thing. That is what Testbed directly delivers. Actually, what we're doing is we're de-risking it. So from the point of view of an end user, this is frontierland. There's lots of technologies here. There's lots of things that can be done with IoT. Everybody knows that this is going to be a hugely impactful revolution, but they're not quite sure how this stuff fits together. And just saying we've done that. It works, it fits together, here's the solution, here's how the companies hook together. We learned some stuff, we refined it, here are our answers, and by the way, here's some inputs to standards, and that's what drives scale, it drives efficiencies. That whole thing really underpins the de-risking of the ecosystem, and I think that's the key deliverable, although what's actually delivered is a technical demonstration.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. So does that resonate with you, Jamie? And you've been involved in a number of test beds
Yeah.
from National Instruments.
Yeah, we have. I do think that there's a great deal of merit of educating the marketplace about the capabilities of these platforms and what they can do. And sometimes we do have a clear goal where we want to bring together some technology and solve a particular problem. And sometimes these test beds are much more exploratory, where we really don't have an end goal in mind, but we want to bring in a great many companies to work on a foundational technical challenge. So we can either be doing these end-to-end solutions where we're really proving to the marketplace that this technology is ready. It's ready to use. It's ready to add value. You can have your data, analyze it, and get these insights that are going to affect the business. And we can also work together to communicate to the platform providers that this new emerging technology, whether it's for communication, synchronization, or security, is also maturing. So it's time for the technology providers to begin using those foundational pieces. So you're either educating the technology suppliers in the marketplace or the end customers through these test beds, and we're getting educated as well.
Okay, thank you very much. So I've had one question now to each of the panelists. Is there anybody out there that is ready to ask a question? Yes, someone is walking. No, someone's sitting down. That's a shame.
Stephen, if I could, I'd love to just
Yes.
see a show of hands of anyone who's involved in a test bed, whether in the IIC or otherwise. Show of hands. 1, 2, 3, 4.
You're going to be counting.
All
for
right,
a while.
sparse, but you're out there. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Okay. Thank you very
Yeah.
much. There's another one. A question, yes?
Question?
Yes, there's
Question?
a microphone at the back. You'll have to go back there. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, the question is about how the different financing of a test bed happens between the different companies.
Who would like to take that one?
You want to start?
I'll start. So, we've been involved in quite a few test beds. Some of them we're hosting, and we're taking the responsibility of providing a facility as well as providing an opportunity to bring in engineers and scientists in the form of a plug fest or a working meeting. And so we're taking on the burden of providing the facility and much of the equipment into the test bed using our own corporate resources. So that's one example. Sometimes we're also participating in test beds that are hosted elsewhere, and then we're only providing a piece of technology. But most of the test beds that I've been involved with, they've been funded by corporations that are looking to solve a particular problem or challenge. So they're self-funded, if you will. And what I say again and again is if there's somebody out there that has a technology or an insight and wants to get involved with these test beds, our expectation with the ones that I'm involved with is you come shovel ready. That may be a US term, but basically what it means is come with your technology and come with the expertise to integrate it into the test bed and really actively participate. So it's not just providing the hardware or the software pieces, but also the expertise to really add some value to the discussion and the learning.
Yeah, and I think there's examples like you may have heard about the TSN test bed earlier where there's like 44 companies, right? There are times when, to your point from earlier.
TSN is?
Oh, TSN is time-sensitive networks.
Thank you.
So, I mean, got the plug. So there are times when you're looking to, make a standard something that proliferates and truly becomes an industry-adopted standard. There are other times when you're just trying to solve a problem for a customer. On the funding front, we're a fairly customer-centric company as a systems integrator, but we've also made a pretty devoted, my team, a bunch of PhDs and Masters of Computer Science who are much smarter than I am that actually focus on the co-innovation part of things. And essentially putting things together from, an overall investment standpoint, it's somewhat untraditional for an SI to invest so heavily in a testbed type of model. So we truly believe that it gives you that additional market penetration. You can invest in multiple different ways. It can be financial, it can be time, it can be bringing a customer, it can be testing out multiple platforms on the same standard. There's a lot of different ways to quote unquote invest.
Okay, thank you. Anything to add, Jim? Or,
Yeah, I think it's all been admirably well explained by my fellow participants. I'd pick up one thing that Jamie said, though, in terms of bring a shovel, come shovel ready, whatever the American term is. I'm sorry. There's kind of a natural correction in that system. The guys who are contributing most are probably going to be getting the most out of it. So it's actually a pretty appropriate way to engage in these things.
Thank you. That brings us into the ecosystem set
Yeah.
of questions, I think.
I mean, that's how the ecosystem works.
Yeah, exactly. Are there any more questions? Just go stand at the microphone and I'm ready to go. Okay, I have a couple of questions then to the panelists about success. Kelvin, define success.
Well, success is highly dependent on exactly what you're trying to do, right? So KPIs are highly variable.
KPI, you're very bad with your
Key
acronyms.
performance indicators, apologies. So there's as I mentioned before, there's a fairly rigorous process that you go through to even get into the test bed, to get it approved by the IIC. We have a couple in pre-approval, and one's been a little interesting and fairly tricky. We actually have a connected worker booth that's in the test bed area. And in that particular example, the KPIs we're looking to use, we have to think a little bit because it's more about worker safety, right? Things like slip and fall or hazardous gas detection. A lot of metrics that, to be quite honest, as we've heard in other sessions, people that are either injured or sometimes die on the job. So finding a willing deployment site to be named has been fairly difficult with that. So we need to, in that case, look to use KPIs that are industry benchmarks so that we can then equate that to what we would actually report out through the IIC and in the public at the quarterlies. So there's a lot of different ways that you can measure success, quote unquote. Sometimes it's the adoption of a standard. Sometimes it's frankly satisfying a customer at different phases throughout the journey of the test bed and then maturing to other deployment sites. There is no single unified standard of success, that's for sure.
Okay, thank you, Kelvin. I noticed that you didn't explain IIC either.
Oh my goodness, I'm just in charge of all acronyms today, I believe.
Exactly, you are. You're the acronym.
Okay, all right, I'm the acronym guy. I can wear that hat. So IIC, Industrial Internet Consortium. If you haven't seen it, this year the little gear actually lights up. So, I mean, come on. I think most, yeah, exactly. I think most of the people are aware of this. I hope so.
I hope so too.
The vast majority of the
Nevertheless.
content for the show, but
Yes.
absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. I was hoping actually that you would define success as a failed test bed. I actually see one that doesn't work. Any comment on that?
Good question.
Well, I was going to take it in a similar direction.
Okay.
I was going to skirt failure, but highlight the concepts of reporting, of taking the learnings, of figuring out what it is you know at the end of this test bed process that you didn't know before, and encapsulating that in a way that can be consumed by the rest of the community. So a test bed, from my perspective, and I think from putting an IIC hat on, and particularly with my role as one of the co-chairs of business strategy and solution lifecycle, it's about taking that learning, putting it out to the community, and moving the overall peanut forwards. And I'll come back to the de-risking comment again. It's about, we learned something, let's not make that mistake again, which is close to failure, but I'm not going to...
Yeah, I would also mention that, failure, everyone that works in innovation learns to embrace failure to a certain degree. But failure can also be maturity to a certain degree, right? Yep. I mean, the test beds don't need to live forever. If you go out, accomplish what you intended to do, then you can record a success. Again, IIC plug, now that we've defined the acronym. There's actually results of the IIC test beds report you can find at the IIC booth. There's some stuff on microgrid as well as a number of the test beds that have had not only kind of, let's call it industry success, but also commercialization, productization, things really moving forward. There's many stages of a test bed as well, and we can get to that down the road.
Okay.
I'll make one comment on success. I think success can be summed up as progress. So all the test beds have quarterly reports that are done. In those quarterly reports, results are included in there, as well as upcoming goals and objectives for the next quarter. And as long as the collaborators on the test bed agree that these are worthwhile goals and milestones, and we're making progress towards those goals, I define that as success. And sometimes a goal can't be achieved, either due to no staffing or there's a gap technically, that we thought something was more mature than it really is, or as it turns out, something wasn't quite as easy as we thought it would be, and then we go back to the drawing board and come at that problem from a different angle. So these test beds are very organic.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't call them living or dying or failure or success. Yeah. It's more of evolution.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it.
That's a very good distinction to make, I think. I especially like the use of the word organic, because we recently spent some time gathering together results from several test beds as a result of some interviews at the Journal of Innovation that we published that is focused on specific topics one at a time. And then we looked also across multiple test beds, because each test bed, of course, has its own business goals that the corporations are trying to meet. So we, quotes IIC, took a look at Industrial Internet Consortium, that is
Thank you for
yes,
clarifying.
thank you. Looked at across the test beds, particularly in respect to security. What are the kinds of things that we're doing in security? Where are our failings? What could we do better? That kind of thing. So I'm still not seeing anybody get the microphone, so I'm going to turn back to Jamie for a second, please. Oh, no, is there one?
Well, no, we didn't give him a chance. We got to keep interjecting with a chance. Unless you guys already know that you're willing to ask a question at any time, just, please jump up at the mic. Again, we want to make this interactive. Please, we got a couple, if that's okay.
Yeah, exactly.
The mic stand is actually right there, so it's a little tricky. Do we have a runner with the mic?
Can Phil Donahue bring?
There you go.
Yeah, thank you so much, because that's, there's a lot of long legs
there's
in
one
that
down
row.
there, right. Excellent, thank you.
Excellent.
Idris Jan from IoT UK. Can you explain how it's possible to get the right mix of companies within a testbed from the beginning?
From the beginning, you say?
Yes.
Impossible.
From the beginning.
No, it's a good question. You got to think about. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. You had a
No,
thought.
no,
you had a thought already preformed. I saw your mouth open. Go ahead.
Well, I think that it's, again, these test beds aren't measured in absolutes in my mind. So trying to set a bar that it's the right or the wrong group of companies, I think you need to bring people that are willing to work and have complementary technologies and are very open. And maybe they're minded of how this solution will be monetized in the marketplace, but they're more concerned about how it will add value to society and industry. And we keep the competitive concerns a little bit off to the side as we're working on these things. So it's really about technology, the willingness to work, and an open-minded view on collaboration. I think those are the right companies. And then whether or not you have enough technology to achieve your goals, sometimes we learn we need to bring someone else to the table to help us. And we have a recent addition to our microgrid communication and control testbed with Wipro. Maybe you can talk about why you decided to join the testbed that had been around for a little bit.
Absolutely. No, I'd be more than happy to. So when we were talking about kind of the phases of a testbed or evolution, right? And granted, this is not a pre-charted process, and this is not formalized or approved or done by committee. This is just, this opinion only expresses the view of Calvin. But that said, I mean, when you look at it, a lot of times you kind of start off with a concept, an idea, or a theory, and a deployment site that you want to go out and test it against. Right? And then it slowly matures where you get a level of adoption, where you get the interest of others in the IIC. And because again, we all get together, and it's over 270 of kind of the IoT leaders in not only industry, but also academia, right? And institutions, et cetera. So we get together and we read out the results. So you find opportunities where you could join. And then as it continues to evolve, ultimately the key goal with a lot of these, and again, the success metrics vary, but the key goal with a lot of these is to drum up new business in some way, shape, or form. Sometimes that ends in just marketing, but ideally and purposefully, the vast majority want to commercialize. So this was at a particularly mature phase where it's a market-leading technology around the sync converters, enabling the capability to have basically renewables enter onto a grid or a microgrid and not have the entire thing fail. Pretty novel, pretty new technology, funded in part by some large customers in the past, so we know there's market value, and we came in to add some value around the analytics, the visualization of that data, bring some IP from our energy and natural utilities and resources business unit, but also look for ways to scale and actually commercialize, because it's the kind of technology that's ready to take that next path and the next phase of maturity as a test bed. So we're very excited. Thank you for letting us join.
So thank you for that question. However, the focus of that was really the ecosystem around the test bed, and Kelvin's just moved it into a segue outwards towards the marketplace. So I'd like to ask Jim, why do we need test beds to help us build ecosystems?
Well, I mean, the IoT represents a new way of working together effectively. So it's not clear, it's not necessarily clear on day one which companies should contribute what, to your question exactly. Yeah. I would comment, I'm going to just draw a slight distinction here between test beds and real world situations, because test beds tend to arise organically and bottom up. So it's about recognizing a particularly complex problem, something that needs solving, and really noodling down on that problem and trying to fix it and bringing the relevant partners together. As soon as you get into real-world problems, you have a thing that needs fixing, and then you're trying to find the partners. You're kind of starting top-down versus bottom-up. so there's a distinction there, and when you start top down, you do need to figure out who the appropriate partners are, and to do that, you need to thought through the frameworks about how people integrate, or how companies work together and how they integrate together. It needs to have been thought through to a greater degree, I think, than they do solely in the bottom up testbed environment. So it's about bridging that gap. It's about getting to that point where when you have identified what the problem is, then you've got a better idea of who and what type of participants need to be involved in that in order to solve the problem. So it's going from bottom up to top down, I would say.
Okay, thank you. So Kelvin, earlier Jamie mentioned the testbed approval process, which we go through in the Industrial Internet Consortium to identify testbeds that will actually yield some value, both to the companies involved, of course, but also to society at large. But I'd like to ask you how that process plays into the whole ecosystem idea.
That's a great question. So, and
I know it's a great question because I asked you for the questions beforehand.
I know. I keep telling you they're good questions. You already know they're good questions. Apologies, again. But at any rate, and also piggybacking on that comment, the question from here too. I'm sorry, everyone loves gravitating towards that question.
Yes.
So to tie them together a little bit more, when you're looking at bringing in the right partners and you're looking at going through the IIC approval process, it's good and it's interesting because we have something IIRA, and to demystify that acronym as well, the Industrial Internet Reference Architecture. Okay, gosh, who's paying me for this? Do I get paid by the IIC? We pay you guys, don't we?
Yes.
Oh my God.
That's how it works.
Anyway, so long story short, it's nice because everyone's already on the same page, right? You come in and you're working off of the same general reference architecture document, which is kind of implicitly agreed to by a very large group of IoT leaders. Then you go also through this security review. So again, with standards and security being some of the biggest issues, going through the framework and ensuring that you're adhering from a security standpoint is actually something we do at the front end, as opposed to an afterthought like you tend to see in execution in the real world sometimes, for better or worse. So everyone starts in that same modality or approach or way of thinking, which is kind of nice, but it doesn't break out by the IIRA, right? And it's not like you need to have one participant who does the edge, one that does enterprise, and one that does platform. As you've seen with TSN and others, I already defined that acronym, so.
You did.
Others, competing companies can come in and you can have multiple flavors or variants. I mean, one of the tricky things that I'm sure everyone in the room is experiencing is customers will have multiple IoT platforms. They will have multiple SI vendors providing services. They will have multiple edge providers testing out different devices. We've heard that from the customers on stage today. The IIC is kind of a giant innovation playground where you get to test and kind of do these little dances of courtship to figure out what's the right mix depending on your customers and depending on what's the experimentation you're looking to really do.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned security, and of course we've also published a rather lengthy security framework document, which contains a great deal of technical detail and reference to standards that are of importance, of course. But I'd like to ask Jim about the business perspective on security as opposed to the technology orientation.
Yes. So this is something which this is live actually. This discussion is live at the moment within the IIC, and really what we're trying to do is put our arms around that security question. And again, it's a question. It's de-risking. So it should be clear if you come to a project which involves a jet engine or a project which involves a pair of connected scales, it should be clear that there are, just intuitively, that there are different levels of security requirement for these projects. But how do you actually go about dimensioning what that security is, what the alternative elements of the solution might be? So one of the things that we're trying to do is to figure out how to parameterize and put frameworks around that analysis so that you can, so that a project manager has a set of guidelines where they can run through those guidelines, and at the end you can come out with some metrics and some indicators of what might go wrong if there's a data breach. Is that going to make a company go bankrupt, or is it going to release private data, or is it something that can be remedied with an insurance policy and put right, for instance? So we're going to come out with these kind of outputs, and that I think is a key consideration, because security costs money, and it costs user experience. So getting the balance right is key, and that's an interesting debate that's live at the moment, in early stages, I would say.
Okay, thank you. So what I heard from that then is that there are different levels of security that one can apply to given systems, and the sophistication of the organization rises as it is more able to determine which level of security to apply to that particular system. Is that an accurate summary of that idea?
Yes, you've introduced another concept there, which is organizational maturity.
Yes.
So there's security.
Do not say that word. Maturity
All right.
is a bad word.
There's the level of security which is applied, and then there is the sophistication of the organization which houses that policy or implements that. To take an extreme case, you wouldn't want the IT guy from your local florist to manage a nuclear plant. You know, the management of that nuclear plant needs to have achieved a certain security level and needs to be housed in an organization which has a certain level of sophistication. So these two things are slightly different. However, a very sophisticated organization may be able to take the decision that actually for a specific solution, they want it to be very easy to use, very user-friendly, very cheap, and there's no real risk, and therefore they want a low level of security. So a sophisticated decision might be to go for a low level of security. It's an interesting debate.
Yes. So the reason that I jumped up and down about maturity is that it's used for both of those two ideas. So I wanted to separate that. Kelvin, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, looking at the security framework and the IIRA, it's holistic too. So when you talk about maturity of the organization, I don't think we as an industry have an answer for true end-to-end IoT security. I know we have a lot of claims in a lot of areas, but certainly there's no, we've already said it's an ecosystem play, you need multiple players, et cetera, but everything from identity management, authentication on the front end, to thinking about traditional security against spear phishing attacks, to fill in the blank. We look at it holistically from edge to core to cloud, or from edge to enterprise to platform, and typically there's not one vendor that can do all of these particular things. And typically, in IoT, what we're seeing now, and you guys were probably involved in the first year of this conference too, I would imagine. And that year we were focused a lot more on explaining to everyone what IoT was. I think we're way, way beyond that now. We're into the use cases, the application, the solutions themselves, and we're seeing a lot more of these digital transformation plays where we need to work with customers to not only secure the edge or a particular gateway or a particular converged appliance, but we need to extend that across the networks, across the rest of the hardware, into the cloud, and across multiple different vehicles. So, it's interesting, and having a framework to at least give you guidance in terms of a jumping off point is a really valuable mechanism to use. So if you haven't looked up some of these things, I highly recommend that you do.
So Jamie, anything to add before I call on the audience again? If you do have a question, please raise your hand. We'll get you a mic.
There's one
at the front, but
we'll
you
get
go
a
ahead
question
first.
out, but
Yeah.
I'll put a call to action to the people out here. The security framework is available on the Industrial Internet Consortium website, and it doesn't just talk about security issues, it talks about this concept of trustworthiness. And the system also has to be reliable and resilient, because if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter if it's secure or not, right? It also has to be secure. So it really enriches the discussion beyond security or IT security to include the overall capabilities of the edge systems as well as the entire stack into the cloud. It's a really great document that was put out by the organization, and I think we're all pretty proud of it.
Yep.
Okay. Could I get a microphone at the front, please? Is there anybody available to help us with that? I'm not seeing anyone. Where's the gentleman who was here before?
Do you want to yell into my cheek?
Is somebody?
Okay. All right.
Yeah, just run up. Thank you. You are at the front. It's easier. Thank you. Thank you for your patience, everyone.
The mic's gone.
The mics have been
Mic's
stolen.
gone.
Speaking of security, where's security?
There it
Somebody
is.
stole the
There it is.
microphones?
Asset
Okay.
tracking.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's going on around
Good
here?
idea.
Asset tracking, seriously.
Thank
Somebody
you.
put a sensor
Hooray.
on that.
Off we go.
Get a sensor on there.
So my name is Samir Vyas. I'm from Wipro Digital. Two questions. One is, as organizations who have been in the testbed space and experience with it, they have realized that it's an ecosystem concept. And so different organizations having different strengths and weaknesses come together to build a solution which is meant to add value to the customer. With that in mind, what are the kind of key challenges that organizations who have embarked on this journey of testbed adaptation felt over the last few years? And what are the kind of successes or how have your organizations respectively been able to overcome those challenges? That's the first question. And the other is, somebody was mentioning about problem solving. So is it, when you talk about testbed and the results out of it, is it only just solving a problem, or are organizations also looking at creating new needs which are not existing, which could add significant value from an IoT perspective?
Thank you, Samir. I would take that question, but we work too closely together, so it would look like I planted you in the audience. So now I'm not even allowed to answer that question. Okay. Wow. Yeah, please.
I'll take a shot at it. There was so much in that question. I mean, I think I lost track of the beginning by the end.
Challenges and
Yeah. So, but I will talk about the needs point. That's a great point. So you're not necessarily solving a defined problem in the marketplace. You may be creating a new need or a new understanding in the marketplace. And one example where many companies are coming together, on the order of 20 companies, is in this, it's been said a couple times, the time-sensitive networking test bed, where we're talking about this true convergence of the networking technology for operational technologies and informational technologies, OT and IT, to create a completely converged network, to allow data to move seamlessly all the way from the sensor to the cloud and across these traditional siloed boundaries. And one thing that we have to do there is not only solve this problem and break down these barriers, we have to explain to people why. Why do they care about that? And deliver best-in-class networking technology to solve the most advanced measurement applications, the most advanced control applications. It's got to be secure. But then this whole game-changing capability of a truly converged network is poorly understood by many people. So we have to not only solve that problem, but also figure out how to articulate the benefit to the marketplace and the customer. That's what I thought of when you said the word need.
Yep. Anything to add there, Jim? There's very much on risk and benefit, and clearly you're happy with that.
Yep.
Okay, no argument.
Okay. The first part of your question was about the... I think the biggest challenge is you may have a very insightful, business-minded, visionary person that says, hey, we need to do this test bed, we can write up the business case, and then it comes time to actually do the work.
Yeah.
And it's securing those resources that have the technical expertise that get behind this vision that is not generating revenue in the short term.
That's right.
It's a cost center. That's a challenge. So it's really aligning the resources before you get involved or quickly after you get involved so you can actually do the work and execute. That is a challenge. It may seem obvious, but it sort of appears again and again where people have a great idea, a great concept, but it's hard to do the follow through.
The other just somewhat related to that, and you look at testbed maturity too, and especially as one gets closer and closer to commercialization, a thread that I just wanted to riff on with you guys too is the ability to change the charter or scope of a testbed when a customer or a different deployment site comes in, right? I mean, think about we have plenty of examples of this where, you know, as things evolve and mature, the requirements change. Customers may only want a small piece of something, right? And you have a vision or a broader scope in association with your test bed and you're trying to do something bigger. What are your thoughts on what that looks like?
Do you want to take it, Jim? You've been quiet for a bit.
I think there's a whole life cycle challenge, isn't there, with test beds?
Yeah.
And not only that, not only with you get change customer requirements or change end user requirements, but there's a question as to whether you should have different test beds doing the same thing. And of course, out of that, you don't get the same first to do this marketing
First mover advantage. And
well, yeah, the whole grist to the marketing mill. What you're doing is you're finding a different way of doing the same thing. So yes, there's a whole life cycle thing, which I think we've only just started, really, because most test beds have been conceived, developed, deployed. The first of them are reporting back, and really where the life cycle goes after that is kind of uncharted territory, I think, mostly.
Well, we just joined the deep learning. Sorry, go
No, you go ahead.
We also just joined in a previous life I worked at Dell EMC and we had started that test bed on deep learning for smart facilities with Toshiba, and Wipro recently joined that too. And it's kind of interesting because we're going to take a lot of what was done at the Kawasaki building in Tokyo and test that out at a different facility in Bangalore and see with artificial intelligence, with deep learning in general, not all algorithms fit perfectly, right? So what happens when we test the same parameters of anomaly detection in a net new environment? It's interesting. It's a new balance.
Yeah. Well, I go back to your question, what happens when a customer has a request and wants to change the scope of the test bed? I'd say, well, why are we doing this to begin with? And so end users will actually adopt the technology and do something meaningful. Right. So I think you react and change. And just because 2 companies or 3 or 4 are involved in a test bed doesn't mean they can't collaborate outside of the test bed or outside the IIC. So, we chase the business, we win the business, we add value in the marketplace where we're providing these high-end intelligent edge devices and working with great service providers and communication infrastructure providers to complete the solution. So it's a cliche, but the customer is king, and I think the customer is king here as well. Yeah. If the members of the test bed want to change the scope and the scale of the test bed, it's something they're free to do. And we've even had test beds replicate and somewhat diverge from one another. So back to this organic concept, these things sort of split and reproduce out there in the wild.
I'm really rather worried about this idea of test beds as amoeba. But
Ours are
splitting and
very
reproduce.
multi-celled.
Okay, fair enough. So we spent the last 30 minutes or so talking about what a test bed is, how it relates to the ecosystem, the ideas of success, failure, and so on and so forth. But I'd like to turn to Jim now and ask, what are the difficulties that we have bringing test beds into different geographies or different socio-economic environments?
Well, different places are different. They need different solutions in many ways. So it's somewhat of a trite answer, but to give a next level of detail, for instance, many of the solutions, many IoT solutions are justified on the basis of a business case. So there's a certain amount that's worth investing in a solution which typically displaces some manpower. So a key variable in there is wage costs. So in different markets, different things will cost in. So you may have a fully fledged solution in an expensive market, and as you move to a cheaper market, you may have to knock out elements of those solution. You may not be able to. You may have to completely recreate that solution. The solution which works in Germany, if you try and export that to India and cut some of the costs of it, you might be going nowhere. You might need to do something new, completely ground up to a different level of quality of service. Catching up on the TLAs.
TLA?
TLAs? Yeah, thank you.
Three-letter acronyms. Sorry. So you may have to completely design it bottom up for that new market. So there are challenges moving things. So you mentioned some of the analytic engines, just moving it from one building to another. People move around those buildings in different ways. Yeah. So they probably have to be reset and refined. Yeah. And then there are more fundamental things. So for instance, the treatment of data, whether that data has to remain in a market or can be hauled out of the market. So if you're doing, for instance, a connected car solution, how much of the processing and how much of the application around fleet management needs to happen in the vehicle versus how much can happen in the cloud, and where does that cloud data center have to be? And the answers to those questions can vary market by market. So there's a lot of fragmentation in there.
Okay.
I would piggyback on that and just mention I'm also a big fan of...
Is it a disagreeable opinion?
No, no, sorry. There will be no chairs flying today. We ended up much more peaceful. We talked about, no holds barred. We said we could disagree, but not a disagreement. It's actually a piggyback here. So I'm a big fan of the Smart Factory Web Testbed too, which is a really good one, and it's looking at integration of some protocols, OPC UA and automation ML, but talking about the geographical distance. Oh no, I can't. I'm not going to break down all that.
Okay,
if I break down all these acronyms, we're never going to get out of here.
OLA for process controlled unified architecture.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay, but long story short, integrating a couple standards, but also from a geography difficulty standpoint, also looking at integrating across languages. So the overall concept is being able to fail over to other, and I'm sure I'll butcher this to some degree. I'm trying to represent Fraunhofer and TE Connectivity and some others on this test bed, but also working between Germany and Korea. So there's another inherent language barrier, and looking at how can I fail over production from a facility in Germany to Korea, or vice versa, if I'm at Access and need to do production somewhere else in the world. So there's some really interesting geographical challenges and language challenges and cultural challenges that go into all this too. And yeah, it goes in that innovation playground concept that kind of makes it entertaining at the same time. Yeah.
And I want to build on to the connected vehicle concept that you threw out there, Jim. That's one area that we're under-exploring in the IIC. I think if there's automotive companies out there, either suppliers into the automotive OEMs or car manufacturers themselves, that want to work in a collaborative way on some of these challenging problems of connected vehicles, sensing and integrated into vehicles, artificial intelligence, V2V, vehicle-to-vehicle communication or vehicle-to-infrastructure communication, please come join the IIC and let's get test beds in that domain moving forward, because that is one of the most exciting technology challenges that we're facing around the world today.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Jim.
I was going to say, it's worth, beyond the come join the IOC, it's worth mentioning that we, and I think probably you, Stephen, are leading some thinking around how to get non-members engaged in testbeds without them actually having to become members.
Good point.
So it doesn't mean signing up and becoming fully fledged, it means coming and participating in the way that you can.
Yes, thank you for that, Jim. Yes, one of the things that we are doing is looking at different conferences of end users in verticals that the IIC can consider attending so that we can learn more about the problems that you need solving. One of the things that happens with a consortium of this nature is that you begin with vendors, and vendors are all talking to each other. And you're hoping, of course, that you're going to sell stuff. That's why you're there. But then you need to bring in the different vertical markets and understand precisely what the problems are. So we talked about connected cars, smart energy, certainly manufacturing, and so on. So if you have an interest in that, please let one of us know, and we'll try and make that work.
If I could just add to that, so Eric Walenza has been working a lot on that from IoT One. I'm a co-chair of the Smart Factory Task Group with him and sharing some of that. And it's an end user advisory program, essentially. So the biggest and most important part of that is basically if you're interested from a deployment site standpoint. So again, the approved test beds are publicly available. You can go online and find summaries of the 20 some odd plus test beds that are out there today. And again, as you've heard and seen, we're looking to experiment. So a new way of shaping things, a new way of deploying something, a new platform, a new product play, a new standard that we haven't considered integrating into something that's already standards focused. Take a look, and this program is just barely starting, so we don't want to jump the gun, but from an end user standpoint in particular, we're looking for engagement.
Thank you. So a few minutes left. Any other questions from everyone out there? Anybody? I'm not seeing it. It's very difficult in the light here. Okay.
Oh,
well,
right there, maybe?
there you go. Question. Thank you.
Oh, no.
Oh, no. He's stepped away.
Well, now you have to ask a question.
Yes,
No,
we'll
just
force
kidding,
you to
just
ask
kidding.
a question.
Yeah,
Well, I have a question for you, Jamie.
Yeah.
Since everyone is being quiet. What's next?
What's next? Well, I think there's a lot of work still to do. I really like the points that the other panelists have made about you don't have to be an IIC member to get involved. So I encourage more people to start reaching out to the member companies or come to a members meeting and join to work on that next challenge. And I'll repeat myself and say that I think the hot new area that we really should be digging into is this area of autonomous driving and connected vehicles, and we should get some great IIC representation at that space. So that's what's next for us.
Okay. Kelvin, anything to add there?
Yeah, so we have a couple of quote-unquote pre-approval test beds that are still taking shape and form. Dr. Asao is leading one on smart airport occupancy analytics. And then already mentioned the connected worker, which Dr. Pai is leading. Long story short, we have a couple of kind of strategic objectives that we're looking at as a company. But I would encourage you to just go peruse the website if you're not terribly familiar with the IIC. Read all the documents that we've been talking about, the multiple acronyms that we've dispelled for you and summarized. I think.
Dispelled? I like that.
Yeah, we demystified, dispelled. We did what we could to break down the acronyms and actually explain what they were.
I'm just thinking about how you spell TLA. That's all it is.
Misspelled, dispelled. At any rate, take a look at some of these things, the IRA, the security framework, and again, as you've heard earlier, let us know what you think of them, right? If there's areas that you think the tires need to be kicked a little bit or open to modification or whatever, a lot of cycles of energy and good thought process from a group of very intelligent people have gone into these, but always open to change, and this industry is growing and evolving, so look forward to engaging, whether it be on a test bed or through the IIC in general.
And Jim?
I'd pick up on many of those points and add, I think it's about liaisons. It's about taking what we've learned and engaging with other groups, Industry 4.0, China 2025. Yeah, there are many such initiatives around the world, plus other other groups of interest within vertical industries. And it's basically about taking our knowledge and our thinking and trying to disseminate that as much as possible. educating the wider ecosystem. And probably it's about standards. It's about inputs to standards, not writing standards. But we should start talking to the standards bodies and saying, these are the things that are required. These are the areas where we do need standards. They need to be doing these kind of things. Which is short of actually doing the standards, but I think that's it. It's about maturing it and ecosystem engagement, I think.
Okay.
And by the way, if you really want to learn about testbeds, Joseph Fontaine is VP of Testbeds at the IIC too. Right here. Sorry to call you out, but I'll tell you, he has a process like you wouldn't believe. So if you want to learn more and get more under the covers of what it looks like to set one of these things up.
And
about 20 of them out there on the floor too.
Yeah, that's a good
Go
point.
out,
Look,
The
go out to
testbed
the
area.
pavilion and the testbed pavilion. You can
Yeah.
learn about testbeds there.
Yeah.
Be a good thing to do.
there's a lot of things there.
Yeah.
There's also a short paper on the results that we have learned so far. It's the first of several reports that we'll be making. So again, if you're interested, please do pick that up. I'm afraid that we have just run out of time. Oh, no, we don't. We have one question.
Oh,
Yep, quick question, go.
They're adding time.
This is Mohammed Sohail from Delhi EMC.
Yep.
And I have a question about more information about the IP and the copyrights of the participating individuals and also corporation. How this is being handled in the IIC.
Should I take that one?
Yeah, why don't you
I think
take
that's your question.
Yeah. So I'll take that one. Actually, we had a short discussion about this this morning. The IIC, its IP policy, intellectual property, thank you, is
Thank you.
basically it's open. If you disclose something to the IIC, then you've disclosed it. So the only thing that we ask of you is not to disclose anything that's confidential. That's it. That's because then you will have made it not confidential. When it comes to testbeds, however, our first question was related to funding. And obviously, if corporations are funding this, they may wish to keep their IP private. And in so doing, then, they may make an agreement amongst themselves as to how both to divide up the intellectual property and the other proceeds. The only thing that the Industrial Internet Consortium requests is the ability to market that. And so we have an agreement on that. But other than that, it's up to the individual companies to sort out how they wish to do their testbeds, because they're the ones funding them, they're the ones making it happen, they're the ones who are producing the results and making them available to the community. So with that, we have definitely run out of time. I do thank everybody in the audience for their questions and running around finding microphones. And of course, I'd like to thank our panelists, Jamie Smith, that's one James, one Smith, Calvin Smith, that's another Smith, and then Jim Morris, another James. So thank you all very much.
Great.
That's great.
Thank you.
Well done.
Well done, you too. Thank you.
Thank you.